Okay, hello everyone. Here to do a video about the Suzuki Hayabusa files that I've managed to decode. Now these files are training files that someone sent me that may be problematic, but may not. But the files themselves and the structure of them are representative of how the tuners are trained to do them for dyno tuning. And there's a couple of really interesting things about these files, but also too, it does sort of raise some discussion points potentially about the dyno only tuning and the way the dyno tuners do them versus the zeitronix logger right around methods. But I wanted to get into the files themselves and just talk through some of the things associated with them. Okay, so the first one was I've created this visualization tool, and it's really just for me to have a look at what the byte data in the file looks like. And so if I come into one of the particular files, and actually I'll stick to the same file I've got open for the others. So this lets me look at how each of the packets are arranged, and this is a very, very strange packet structure. So you can see that there are these longer ones and there are shorter ones, which had me thoroughly confused. Yeah, so that was the first one. So I had to go looking for two different packet lengths. But this is just a tool to help me sort of visualize what sort of data is in there and how it might change and whatnot. And lets me zoom in and have a look. So this is the start of a packet 00, 01, 02, and then we start getting into the time. No, this is the packet size. So this is the size indicator for the long one and for the short one. And then we've got the time. So these bytes here represent the time. So these ones here are just the general data. Now if I go all the way back out, this actually allowed me to learn a few things about the file. So these here are the end of the long packets, the checksum, and these are the checksum values for the short packets. But we notice that regardless of them, there's this one here is quite constant, and this is constant. So if we were to stretch this here out to here and make them the same length, they would actually line up. And the same goes for this, all right, is representative of this. And this here is actually AFR, and the AFR column I think is one of these ones, but we'll get to that later. It's not really relevant. It does indicate that these packets here are, or these packets here are part of the Woolwich log file and they're not actually operational data from the bike. Another thing that came out of this was that, well, why are there short and long files? Long packets. And the reason there are long packets is they're the ones with all of the bike data in them, and all of the short packets only have AFR in them. If I was to, let's see, can I zoom in on a short packet? Yeah, here. So this is the AFR data for the short packets. So the short packets are the ones with the solid block here, and this is AFR data. AFR data, AFR data, AFR data, and that's the only data in them. You can see they're all empty through here, all empty through here, right? And then the solid static ones at the end. That to me says, well, the logger is able to log AFR faster than the bike is outputting these bike records. So these are the bike records here, right? And they're the long ones. And okay, that made me sort of understand the speed a little bit, and it kind of made sense that they didn't go and write a full packet for it. But what does it look like? And that's where things, well, potentially get interesting. So if we go and look at this particular file, we can see, and of course my decoding of it is kind of irrelevant, but I've decoded it here. When we look at that file, a fair bit of data I had to to play around with what was viewed, and it turns out the bike has a secondary throttle plates. We can output the XML for that, right? And that S1. Yep. Get rid of the dot. All right, and then we can come to here. And then turn that. Okay, so that then allows me to do a comparison between them. So if I go and open that particular one, so this is the data that they output. Now, there's another interesting aspect of this is that this does not align with this. Well, it does to a large degree. So we have the time, we have these values here all match up. Gear's very interesting, but we don't have the pair valve and in the log viewer here, but we do have it in the file, and it actually does potentially get set. I had to hack it to get it to appear, but I thought that would be something you'd actually want to appear in here, given its potential to mess up the AFR values. It's probably why they disable it or ask for it to be disabled, is because the software can't filter it out. But if we can see it and it's not disabled, then it's potentially a filter that we can apply ourselves in terms of the way we adjust the throttle position. We should be able to adjust and filter a Suzuki file based upon that value. Anyway, getting back to the file, so if we look at this, you can see here one of the things they do if they're using auto-tune live. So they have the bike plugged up, they have it sitting on the dyno, and then they're trying to sort of go through and fill cells in with different runs. And you can see that's what they're doing here. So they've started the bike up, we've got our coolant temperature, so they've waited for it to be warm, right? And then they've started their log. Now I don't know how it got chopped off. That's curious, but yeah, they've moved it up to gear 3 because they need one with enough load to provide enough rolling resistance for it, but they're not trying to do a high-speed top gear full run. And yeah, you can see they've just wound it up to full throttle for a bit and let the RPM ramp up, and you can see the secondary throttle plates there, and then they've let it drop down, let it sit for a minute, and then brought it up to partial throttle, so to get the next row of cells down. So what we're trying to do in the fuel maps is they're trying to gather data for this set of cells here, and then they're coming back and they're trying to gather data for this set of cells here. Now I doubt that's 90%. Okay, that's pretty accurate. I suppose they're looking at the data viewer, so they can see what they're doing. And then they're doing 80%, but you can see here they're trying to find that right spot. They've got to open it up. So they lose that low RPM bit. You know, it's not going to be easy for them. Now here you can see they're going for 70. They got there, but it was a bit jerky. All right, and so on. So what have we got here? We've got 65, so they didn't get 60. Does it start to break up? So 65, 60, okay, so they are still on. They're going visually by the cells they can see on the computer. Let's see, 55. 50, then this one should be 40. So this is the process they take. So what are we down to? 25, 20, 25, 20, 15, 16. Yeah, that one, what was it? Yeah, 2016. And then, yeah, we're getting into crazy territory. So 11, 10, 10, 8.1. So they were trying to get their 9.3 here and they couldn't. And then, yeah, this is just absolute chaos. This is my first time actually looking all the way through it. So God knows what they're doing here. Looks like they're just doing a few little blips. So blip, 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 blip. And then we're done. We shut it off. So that's their process, and they really don't get a lot of data for each RPM cell. And on the Suzuki, well, they get more AFR data. So, well, they get a fair bit of AFR data. Most of it's faked as to which RPMs it goes to. So what they do is, if we come back to one of these files, we'll go to theirs, right? These two, so what they do is the first packets that came in are actually short ones. Oh, actually, I should say that. Yeah, this is actually correct. The first ones up here were short ones, and then a long one, and then a short one, a long one. In processing their log file, these ones here are genuine long ones, and then the next genuine long one is this one, I believe. Right, and these are all faked. So what they do is they take the time difference between this one and this one, because this one's genuine. So these are long records, and this one would be a long record. And so these are actually distributed between the two values. Okay. So these values here are all faked, or they're calculated. So it's just they take the time difference between these and they just add a little bit on, same amount, until it fills in the gaps in the short file. Oh yeah, in the short packets. So that data there, then if we come back to the viewer, that's these little ups and downs look smoother than they are. If I zoom back in, go back to the start. So these little up and downs, even though, is the time changing? No, that's solid time. Yeah, you can see this is going up and down on the time and the RPM, but in reality it's like that point, this point, this point, this point, this point, this point, this point. These are, all the smoothness of these is actually faked. Now the bit that I was really interested in, and I'll zoom back out, so they're doing this run and we've got AFR here. So the AFR is all over the shop. Now these guys aren't seeing this because they're not looking at the file. But the bit that got me was the ignition. It's like, okay, so they've just cracked open the throttle, and what we're seeing is, for no reason here, they've just done, you can see here, so they're idle. Why has the ignition suddenly shot up? I mean, the throttle values here, 2.5 versus 1.9, so it's okay, it's a small, very, very small throttle thing. And then we're still 2.5, and then we're 3.6, so we jumped up to there. 5 has jumped right up to there, but it's overshot. Oh, because of the gear shift. Okay, so I don't know if that was quick shifter. I'd have to say yes. But and here's an intriguing thing. Going from second to third threw in a zero record on the gear shift. So the gear shifting isn't that clean in terms of how it's logged. But so uh, so that's very interesting, and of course it impacts the AFR. Um, Now advancing. So this spike here is due to the gear shift. Don't necessarily know if there's a quick shifter. I suspect there is, but then yeah, it drops back down. Then we get a small spike as they sort of grab the throttle and they're going to ramp it up. But then we get another dip, and a dip here when they've cranked it open, and that's intriguing because you can see up the top that the throttle is just being in the process of ripping it open. So why this dip? Why this step? Because you can see here they're basically almost at full throttle. Now we were here at a very small throttle, okay, and here we've got the same ignition but at a much wider throttle. So the throttle maps are quite intriguingly rough. The ignition maps are quite intriguingly rough and don't really align where you expect they might be. And then of course we're 100% throttle here, and we're pinned on 100% throttle, and the ignition's going up and down. And we also see the secondary throttle plates finally decide to ramp up. Now I can expect that's probably to produce a bit of low RPM and stop it bogging down, so we get a bit of low RPM torque. But we're definitely getting some strange behavior in the AFR here. And we don't see the fueling on here, so we don't have injector duration. They don't give us that data. So we need to have a look at these bits here specifically. Now my presumption would be that they'd be training people on a stock bike, but you love the claim that the stock bikes are always running lean. These seem to be running pretty rich. Now the next bit that concerns me is this, the AFR here and this up and down. And for me, I expect this is a rev limiter, but we can't really see it because it doesn't show up. Unlike the delimiters on the Yamaha file, we can see it using the ignition, but we can see this little RPM dip here. So, but that RPM dip, it corresponds with a little throttle spike on closing the throttle. So this to me is a real worry. I wouldn't want this data getting through because it shouldn't be that coarse. So there shouldn't, it's just chopped off. Yes, you'd expect it to go up, but I wouldn't expect this tiny little dip to bring it back down again. Although we are zoomed out, so oh, actually these should be corrected, so they should be aligned back up. That's one thing you've got to remember when you're looking at the log files. So these, all right, there's going to be an offset between these AFR values. So this AFR value would probably belong to these records up here. But Woolwich is able to sort of adjust that when they put it into their viewer. Anyway, you'd want this out. You wouldn't want this stuff getting through. And if we have a look over here, we've got the same stuff as well. So if you were tuning with these files, you really need to be careful about what was going on. I'd probably be having a good solid look. You can see the ignition kind of repeats the same pattern. Definitely the data needs a good solid look. Actually, I will run these files through auto-tune, but I'm not going to do it in this video. I've just spent days decoding the log file. If we have a look here, very similar pattern. So it's interesting that while we open the throttle up straight away, the secondary throttle plates actually ramp up quite slowly. So um, that'll be some interesting maps to have a look at. But yeah, we get a very similar pattern. So we'd have to be really careful about what's going on with these AFR values and shooting up. So so these are quite lean. 15.6, this is quite lean, this is quite lean, and this is just on initial opening of the throttle and idle. So it's lean on idle, but it's rich on throttle. Then again, that might be what the targets are. What we got the same here. So very similar pattern. I am very surprised and a little concerned, I didn't mention this, is that the ignition advance shoots right off on closed throttle. So you close the throttle down and yeah, the ignition advance just shoots right up. And we can see, and these are the IAP maps, but these files, and I'm rambling here, but yeah, these particular files are intended to just tune one thing at a time. So you may, if you talk to Woolwich, they will tell you, oh, don't tune TPS and AFR. Tune your TPS first, and sorry, not AFR. Tune your TPS first, and then tune your IAP. Okay, which of course doesn't make sense for those of us riding around with the logger constantly recording from the zeitronix unit. We do both at once, and there's no reason not to. But this is the sort of reason why they say do it separately, just focus on one thing at a time, because they really don't have the data to do it properly, and you need to be able to exclude some of this stuff. So I would suggest when you come in here and you've got, let's see if I can bring it up. Okay, let's look at the auto tune settings, and I feel that when you're doing tuning in this way, these actually start to become really important to eliminate some of these artifacts, because when you have so little data being collected, these start to get in the way and they will taint the very small amount of data that you have. And yeah, it would be interesting, and I will do some actual tuning. I will actually apply these in auto tune later and see the effects, or try and see some of the effects of these. These ones here might actually be important for this. The TPS cell transition filter, that might actually work for these, where you're turning it on and off, and it might help you eliminate this sudden ramp up and the sudden ramp down, and let you just deal with the AFR going through the middle here. Right, although the bit that really worries me is a lot of this seems to be ignition related. So I'd be probably looking at the ignition maps first, just to see, because I can't justify these being such huge jumps unless there's associated huge fueling jumps with them as well. So I certainly wouldn't just treat this as a fueling task. Anyway, I think I'll call it at that. I've got a fair bit of editing to do because I've been rambling on this video. But yeah, the file's decoded. It's not available. It's not available yet because it's only decoded in my program. So I sort of had to do a few modifications to this. And I know I'm sort of winding this down, but it's still a really good diagnostic tool. It's easier for me to decode here, and then actually there was one thing I did want to talk about. So the calculations, and surprise, surprise, Woolwich has a throttle position sensor problem with the Hayabusa file. So this should not taper off like this. What they've done is anything above 214 gets put to 100, and it just creates this issue here. So I did a didn't image, I'll pop it up later, but the correct value should actually go from the tip here to the tip here. How far out does it put it? Well, if we come back to the file here and we say, okay, he's 100% throttle here, all right, well, he may not be. Probably a bigger one to say is this one here where he's trying to be at 90%. This is actually 80%. So he's tuning the wrong cell. Uh, although if you look at the AFR values, they're actually pretty consistent in terms of how they jump up and down. So it's probably safe in that position here. So here we're tuning the 80% cell. Oh, sorry, but the throttle isn't at 80% here. It's at 70. Oops. So yeah, we'll each have screwed another one up with their formula, and that's yeah, a bit of a problem. So what I probably will do is I'll expand this to do Suzuki files. Uh, it does work for the Yamaha files. Yes, there have been some hiccups, mainly just because I've been lazy about deploying it. So I fixed a couple of little bugs like being able to refresh it. So if I want to duplicate the tab, that would always error before and you'd have to sort of come back to the start and start again. But now you can go to it directly and it just works. Uh, if you want to send me files, send me files. I love them. It just helps me. I've been trying to do the Kawasaki files, but it's a bit hard without being able to come in here, because one of the things I do, and I'll talk about it, let's see, if I come and have, I'll do this one here. So if I've got the viewer, I can come in and hack some data. So you can see here I've gone in and edited data into some of the cells, just some additional data, just to see if there was anything in there. And I did find some interesting things. So if I come here, and so what I was able to do is you can see that TPS is shot up here on this particular record. TPS is up here. This is from a completely different spot, and we can see that suddenly, despite this not being an ETV bike, or ride-by-wire bike, we actually have some ETV values going up and down. Now, I couldn't get any other values to appear. This is quite zoomed in at the moment. Yeah, I was able to. Oh, yeah, inlet air temperature. You can see that shot up there and there, and I think there were some other ones like pressure and coolant, stuff like that. So they actually appear in multiple cells in the log files. Um, Potentially it's a bike to bike thing, and they appear in different ways. I've been able to decode those additional columns just by being able to actually go in and modify a particular file and then look at it in the viewer and see what changed. Mainly I was trying to chase the speed. So I was trying to get either the vehicle speed or the front and rear wheel speed to show up. Now I know that on a dyno, the front wheel is going to be strapped down. I don't know if they have a rear wheel speed sensor on this particular bike. Technically speaking, rear wheel speed sensor is more for uh, things like traction control and stuff like that, where you're looking for slip targets, unless you're Yamaha, in which case you don't care about slip targets, you'd rather people crash. Anyway, there was absolutely no vehicle speed log data. So it sort of says the Hayabusa doesn't log the speed to, or Woolwich don't collect the speed. So it may be broadcast on whatever data bus that the bike's outputting, but Woolwich might actually be ignoring it and not putting it into their log files, which would surprise me. I think they just log whatever they could. So I don't criticize that, it just may not be there. Mind you, if you've got a Hayabusa, you could be going pretty quick anyway. You might not actually want that logged. Maybe it's a safety feature from the police. But yeah, so that's the log file, and yeah, I will set it up so we can do log file adjustments for it here and get that released. I may not do it on this screen, or I'm going to have to make it so you can choose roughly whether it's a Kawasaki or a Yamaha or a Suzuki, because the values are different, the formulas are different. One thing I will come back to this is that the base is actually fixed, so it's only at the top. Now with the Yamaha one, it's out bottom and top, and through the middle is all correct. But the bottom ones are actually the more dramatic ones. So that's the on-off throttle and idle. So on the Yamaha, it's the idle area, so closed throttle and whatnot, and that's why people with tunes have such poor fuel economy, is because the idle settings, and this came up from the TPS recall, the idle settings are really, really rich. All of the tuning has gone into the wrong cells on those fuel cells. So do I have them up? So yes, this is a Suzuki file, but in terms of the Yamaha ones, yeah, the 0% and all the low throttle percentages and that are all tuned to values from up here. So you can see there's 879, well that's getting stuck down here in the lower column, and so on. Interesting, they don't have a 0%. The Yamaha one has a 0%. I had Woolwich tell me that they weren't updating 0% because the bike never actually reads from it. That is false. The bike definitely reads from it, because as soon as they updated it, the fuel economy improved dramatically. And it goes to show, it's like even the experts don't necessarily understand the bikes that they're dealing with. Every bike is different, every bike behaves differently, and it's always a good thing to pay attention to the bike, because the bike will always tell you the truth. And unfortunately, I think a lot of tuners don't. A lot of tuners just trust what they're told and never question it, and that's why there's a lot of bad tuning out there. And I know we like to see some people who are like to get on YouTube and complain about other tuners and how they're the most awesome ones ever, and they're better than everyone else, and look at everyone else's mistakes. But I bet you they're making the exact same mistakes. They just don't realize it because there's no self-reflection there. They don't actually listen to the bike. But yeah, I'll have to call this done, and yeah, I've spent 3 4 days uh, decoding these files, and it's time to go writing. So thanks for tuning in, and catch us next time.